Where are the release forms that
Exactly. Good evening, everybody.
Good evening.
Good evening, sir. How are you? The synagogue has entered the 21st century, and we're now recording our classes. So that hopefully they will very quickly after each class make themselves onto a website, and everybody will be able to listen and rehash, so that when you get to the final exam, there'll be no excuses that you weren't familiar with the text. How are you? We're going to be short. Well, that's okay. Don't take it personally. How's everybody? Good? Wonderful week? Enjoying a bit of the snowfall?
Yeah.
Excellent. So it's great to see some new faces from last week's class. Welcome back. Some people have been on hiatus. Thanks for coming. We're continuing tonight a discussion on the impact, Torah veils and the impact on the emotional quotient series. That's our overall topic. We're really focusing on anger management and lessons from Adam Sandler. We're going to do a quick recap of the class from last week, although I don't want to spend too much time going over it, not to be punitive, God forbid, but just because that was the focus of last week's class. These are the ones with staples, and these are the ones without staples, my apologies. But they're the same content. We're going to begin on page 8. Here you go. Excellent. Okay, does everyone have? So just a quick review. Has everybody seen the film Anger Management, Adam Sandler? No? Okay, so that's everyone's homework. There's a special tonight on Netflix. Put in the code KJ. It's a funny Adam Sandler film. Some of them Adam Sandler films are not funny, but if you like his humor, this is a cute one, and it's really about him dealing with his anger, starring, I guess, connect with Jack Nicholson. So it makes for a good film. We all know the damaging effects of anger. They affect our relationships with our families. They affect our relationships in the work front. They can affect our innate objects that we own, like our iPhones and our TVs and our car doors and our tennis rackets. Whatever we get angry with, we can destroy.
Steven.
That's a librarian. Yeah.
What are they calling now?
I guess no one would argue
Oh, I thought it was all you said. It was
that there are any positive effects to anger. Unless anyone wants to challenge me, is there any positive effect of anger? Every part of our life is affected by anger. Anger causes a person to be disliked. If you get the reputation of being an angry person, then people are going to want to stay away from you. You shared an example of someone who has anger episodes, and you're going to want to, if you know that's how a person is based on their character makeup, you're going to want to distance yourself at some point. On a spiritual level, we looked at what anger does to you as a character, that it really deprives you of any growth spiritually, and how anger doesn't affect just the people you interact with, how it affects you on a deep core. And really we looked at some sources how anger goes deeper than the character, and we said that the contrasting characteristic to anger is really patience. If you're patient on some level, you become calm, you become constructive. And then we looked at a few rabbis who are really known for their patience, and that's sort of where we left things off. Any overarching questions? Any thoughts anyone had who was here last week on any insights? No?
You can be patient in one respect.
So how do you convert the anger into patience? Transform it?
Excellent question. So we looked actually at a few rabbis, and we'll begin with this. How do you convert the anger into patience? Sorry?
I hope you have a good answer.
The answer, I think, is actually going to come out of the discussion we have, but it's an excellent question. And if it was so easy, then why are there angry people in the world? Go for it.
I was just going to say, I think there's a difference between anger and rage. You can be angry with somebody because of some act that they committed that justifiably justifies the negative response, the displeasure, which can be tantamount to anger. And you can be angry without expressing rage, whether physical, some manifestation of physical rage or the like. So you can calmly tell somebody you were unhappy with what they did and be angry with them, which I think is a perfectly okay emotion, without being unpleasant, uncivil. So I look at those two emotions a little bit.
I guess but they're interplayable words, you know. How do you define what is rage and what is anger?
By the velocity of it.
Rage is when you lose it.
Rage is,
Rage can also be, there can be positive aspects of rage.
How?
Well, I guess one could argue I'm so excited I'm filled with rage.
no.
No? You think rage is only
I
negative?
think rage is just. I don't know.
No?
Once,
There's some-
once
Maybe.
you can argue that putting somebody in
One
their place is a
psychiatrist.
positive
That's
aspect.
what I was thinking. Wouldn't if you never let that part of you express itself, I would think that that would build
So then you
up.
would just.
That there is something to venting it, as long as you're venting it in a productive way,
Right.
which I would assume wouldn't be rage, kind of what
Wouldn't
you're
be on
saying,
another person.
which would be just being angry with the situation.
Right. I guess when you use words like venting and rage, there's an element of anger and violence that comes out there. Before we begin, we're actually going to begin on page 8. But I want to look at this quote, which I asked those who were here last time to focus on. It's on the opening page. It's by a rabbi who is a disciple of the Baal Shem Tov. The Baal Shem Tov was the founder of the Hasidic movement. The Hasidic movement started in the 17th, 18th century, and it's a very emotionally driven strain of Judaism. And there are many different Hasidic dynasties that were in existence and still exist today. Most popular Hasidic dynasty, anybody? Chabad, exactly. Thank you,
I was gonna
Lubavitch.
say Rabbi Krasniak.
Right. He's not a dynasty unto himself.
Oh, yes.
Absolutely, no question.
Just starting with.
Just
Right,
start your own
so-
group.
So the Chabad Lubavitch Hasidim is certainly the most well known, and they're all around the world. But
Thank God.
there are many others, and if you want to find them, just go over the Williamsburg Bridge or the Brooklyn Bridge, and that's where a lot of them live right now. But they live all around the world, even where I come from, in Australia. There's small sects of Hasidic groups. Anyway, the Baal Shem Tov had many students, and one of his students was this Rebbe, the Koretzer Rebbe, he was living in Ukraine. And this is his quote on anger, which I think is an important opening frame, and hopefully we'll come back to it at the end. Long ago I conquered my anger and placed it in my pocket. When I have a need of it, I take it out.
Were you reading from?
Front page.
Oh,
Next to Adam
You're on
Sandler.
page 8.
Oh.
I said we'd start on page 8. I said before we get to page 8, we're going to look at the opening page. Okay, long ago I conquered my anger and placed it in my pocket. When I have a need of it, I take it out. Any insights, any thoughts?
It's a tool.
It's a tool.
So sometimes one is not in control of one's anger. That's a pretty, I mean, that's a lovely concept. It's simplistic, oversimplistic maybe.
So
Depends
a
on
lot
the
of
anger,
the
not just.
lessons that some of the Hasidic rabbis teach, and most commonly the most popular lessons come from the Kotzker Rebbe, are simplistic lessons, but there are deep messages behind it. And essentially what he's saying is that Jewish anger management, it really comes down to 2 words. 2 simple words. Free will. Now how is he saying it comes down to free will? He's saying that we have the profound capacity to manage our anger. Now obviously I'm breaking it down to a very simple, basic level, but he's saying that how does he deal with his anger? He is in control of his anger is not in control of him.
But there are some people who,
Lucky guy.
with mental illness,
Mhm.
who can't control their anger.
There's some people with mental illness that unfortunately do many
Yeah.
things, you know. I mean, but
So are they still held as responsible as people who?
that's an excellent question in the eyes of society or in the eyes of Judaism.
both.
Well, I don't want to
in
answer
front of
that.
God.
So people that certainly have either chemical imbalances or diagnosed conditions, really not subject to much of what we talk about here, or probably any other, in general society, I guess, if people have conditions, then you wouldn't hold them to the same level. And if someone has a mental condition, a level of mental retardation, you're not going to treat them, the same way as you would somebody else. I think that'd be in a separate category. But he's essentially saying that anger is an object which is so malleable that he's able to put it in his pocket, and he controls his anger. And the flip side of what he's saying, which I was interested to see if anybody brought out, what's the other side of what he's saying? It's okay sometimes to be angry.
Mm-hmm.
He's saying, because when I need it, what does he do? He takes it out of his pocket. So he's sort of saying there is a positive time for anger.
But not rage.
But not rage.
But it's a normal human.
Totally.
I mean, we're not all happy-go-lucky, happy people. I mean, if you didn't get angry, I think
No,
people might
not
not
But
take
you
you
might be-
seriously. I would think if you never could express
or if you just
frustration in a
Yeah.
situation. But I think as long as it's productive.
like they don't
Rage
express it, they
seems like-
drink instead of like showing.
There are some
But,
people
yeah.
that you meet, or at least that I've met, who at least you never see them get angry.
Well, they probably
They're
like,
probably
at home,
angry,
they're probably
but maybe
beat
they can
their
hold it
spouses
in.
or-
So you're arguing that
I don't
at
know,
some
maybe
time,
I'm
at some
thinking
point,
bias in particular.
everybody has to have a vehicle to vent, where they don't
If
do it in
you-
public. Actually, the Rabbi Norman Lamb, who's the chancellor of Yeshiva University, has a great book called The Good Society, and he quotes another Hasidic rabbi, the Gesistner Rebbe, another sect of Hasidim, and he says that this rabbi never expressed his displeasure to a person on the same day that they angered him or upset him.
Mm.
So if you upset me on
Restraint.
Wednesday,
Right.
Yeah.
he would take
Shouldn't
he wouldn't because in sharing his displeasure on that moment, what's actually coming out, your blood is boiling, you're
Yeah.
angry, and you're really fueled by your anger and your temper. He would come back the next day, and he would say, "I was upset with you yesterday."
That's what he said.
Exactly
Yeah.
what he's saying. But it was very different to do it 24 hours later.
Sure.
Had
Well,
a
yeah, I
night
read
to-
something like that. It was on like juicy.com or something. They had this article
can
about
quote that,
anger.
yeah.
It said, wait the 24-hour rule. If you're upset with somebody, wait so you don't. And
I
you're
just
a
had
little calmer.
a situation like this, which is, it's really, I have a lot of them, but anyway, this one was with my sister, and it was a week, it's over a week, and there was something she said and did, and the truth is, it's like restrain of pen and tongue they talk about, because I've waited, in fact, I was thinking about it tonight, about calling, but now, when I'm gonna call, it's gonna be a very different conversation than it would have been a week ago, which would have been very damaging. I mean, and I never was able to, I would go from 0 to 1,000 in a second, if somebody hurt me or whatever, so I would be more in the, raging kind of
Rage
thing.
front.
Yeah,
Okay. It's good to know. It's also very important that we know how we act in these circumstances,
Yeah.
and very important that we can admit it to ourselves and to those that are close to us. That I shared last week. I grew up with a neighbor who's guy similar age than I am, and his dad had terrible anger, and he would come running into our home, at least 3-4 times a week, getting seeking refuge from his dad. But over time, the family actually went to family therapy, and the dad learned that when he hit that point, he'd step out of the house and he'd take his time to cool down.
Where he learned that.
And he learned that and it's much better being in control of it.
Yeah.
It used to be that and I'm not sure it's even changed, the prevailing view of, marriage and couples and arguing don't go to bed angry. And then I heard another psychologist talking on TV, and he said, it's not always the greatest thing to just keep staying up and talking about something that people have sort of maxed out on the topic,
Men
and now
need to
it's
talk
late
about
and
their
you're
feelings.
frustrated.
Oh, that's so
Sometimes
funny.
it's better, even if you go to sleep not in a great place, at least when you wake up in the morning, you've had a chance to perhaps digest it a little bit, then sleep on it, and revisit it. And it made more sense to me than, the idea of don't have to make up before you go to sleep. It's not always practical. Sometimes you just get into this rut and you're just going in circles, neither party convincing the other, you're not getting anywhere, you're getting, frustrated, and
Never had.
I think the other guy's view, which is just chill, sleep on it, so you go to sleep not in the best place, but you have a better chance of resolving it satisfactorily if you just distance yourselves from one another for a bit,
Put 'em on the couch.
and then revisit it.
So certainly I agree. Conventional wisdom was I never go to bed on the other end of the bed. You know, was a complete.
One's on the
There's a whole
couch,
country
one's
in the middle of the two of you. And there is a great argument to say, you know what, we're too angry. We're going to be speaking way past each other. Let's take a time out. Hopefully, no one checks into local hotel. Let's just take a time out at home, and we'll see what happens the next day.
Anger can have a constructive place in dealing with children, for example. If you discipline a child and you want to make a point, I think with a child, it's more effective, even if you're not genuinely enraged, but you want to make a point, so you might speak more loudly than you
But
otherwise might.
I would call that fear, I think.
No, but, well, I think the child might say, Mom or Dad is angry, mad,
See, I
and
read
then
that-
I'll
Like
do that
it's
again.
It works with
10 after
adults
7 when I
too.
got out of the shower this morning. My 2.5-year-old son was taking water through the pitcher out of the toilet and pouring it onto the toilet floor. I said, Ethan, what are you doing? He said, I'm making pancakes. So
Oh,
the only-
so mommy making
he was very nice of him to make pancakes. And then he was reaching for the toilet to get the syrup. He was going to get the toilet
We
water.
have a
Anyway.
better recipe.
I don't think
So
like
I
that's-
instilled fear in him by raising my voice and giving him eyes that I think are somewhat angry looking, but I think it's more fear than anger, but I hear the point.
Well, you could be a coach of on a sports team.
Right.
And there are lots of anecdotes where the coach, in order to inspire the team or to trigger greater motivation the second half, is angry.
Right.
You're not playing well, your defense is terrible, you're not following the instructions I gave you. That anger he pulls out of his pocket in order to inspire the team. So I suppose there are those occasions where it might be an effective tool used in a positive way.
Certainly. Certainly.
See, I had read that when you're angry with your children, you shouldn't just say, well, I'm upset with you right now, da 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 da, and you wait until you've calmed down so you don't hit your child or whatever. Because some people hit your kids or whatever, or call them names.
We're throwing out the window.
Yeah, well, we didn't have pancakes for breakfast this morning.
That was,
Um,
but that
anyway,
was,
let's-
it
It was very cute of
baby.
him.
He doesn't know.
Not at all. Let's turn to page number 8. So
Slam
there are different strategies to dealing with our anger, and this is going to be the framework for tonight's discussion. Looking at some Torah sources, of course, there is a whole industry and many books in Barnes & Noble on anger management, and I don't make myself out to be an expert on anger management. There are many psychologists who have done their dissertations on this aspect, but I want to look at a few Torah sources that come from classical Jewish sources, rabbis, and look at ways in which they can help us, and we can learn from them how to deal with our anger. So the first is really coming from this umbrella idea of forming positive habits, and it doesn't just have to go in concert with anger. It goes in line with anything in life. If we form a positive habit around something, it's going to overtake us in a positive way. And the second piece will be like changing the way we think and we approach. By getting used to speaking gently, training ourselves to be patient, because that was the antidote. What we said last week was really one way to not let our anger control us, but to control our anger, is this idea of being patient and taking a breather, and that could be that night or just in general when we speak to someone. We'll find that we get angry a lot less than we used to. The first source, number 1, taken from Nachmanides Ramban, and it's called Igeret HaRamban, letter of the Ramban. And he wrote I guess really a treatise. He wrote a letter to his son. And the instructions in the front of the letter that his son should read this letter every day. And it's a beautiful letter, and I encourage those that want to read it to look it up online. You can get it at a Jewish bookstore. I can send you a copy. And he actually said to read the letter weekly. And a lot of the letter focuses on anger management. And it was his father telling his son, and they were not in the same city, they were 2 different locations, how he should accustom, how he should be. And it's a beautiful letter, not only to read to your children as a good night story, but to really think about as an approach to life. And I want to read source number 1. Thank you.
Accustom yourself to speak gently to all people at all times. This will protect you from anger, a most serious character flaw which causes one to sin.
Sharing a very basic idea. What's it suggesting? Just speak with a different tone. And a slight change in the way you speak to someone, in the way you hear yourself, and not only the way you're heard, but also the way you hear yourself speaking, will allow yourself to be heard and change your character. Simple. Maimonides, source number 2, codified Jewish law. We know he was a Jewish doctor who took all of Jewish law and put it into his own categories, and a lot of what we learn and often we quote many of his sources, Hilchot Deot, and the laws of understanding how we should exist. This is source number 2. Anybody want to read? The English, thank you.
There are certain character traits that one must distance oneself from in the extreme. In fact, it is forbidden to take the standard approach of the middle path regarding these character traits. Anger is an extremely negative character trait, and it is fitting for a person to distance himself from it to the opposite extreme. One should train oneself never to become angry, even regarding things for which anger might be justified.
So, concerning most character traits, which way should we go? Extreme, middle? Which path should we take? Middle. Most of us take the middle path. It's the safest place to function. But he's saying something unique or radical when it comes to anger. He's saying concerning anger, you have to take the extreme path. You have to avoid anger altogether. Now we said earlier that there might be some positive pieces to anger. He's outright saying stay away from as much anger as possible. And he generally teaches that we should balance who we are, balance our characters. We should be strong, yet we should be flexible. We should be compassionate, yet we should be firm. And we have to really balance ourselves. When it comes to anger, he's saying it's polarizing and we have to be on the other side of the table. I guess there's no middle way to anger. Once you start to feel yourself in a situation getting angry, sometimes the more you speak and the more you allow yourself to get into that conversation and that topic, the more the rage builds up and the more heated you get and the more you lose your temper and your anger and sort of pop like a gasket. Hi, how are you? Welcome. It's okay.
Someone is making pancakes.
I was making pancakes.
We're not going to get angry.
We're not going to get angry, no.
Okay. We're on page number 8. Okay, we're going to move on to source 3. Rabbi Wolbe is a modern source as opposed to Nachmanides and Maimonides, who thousands of years old. Rabbi Wolbe taught and wrote a book on deep Jewish thought. Source number 3. Anybody want to read? Thank you.
We will train ourselves to be patient. We will fix a specific amount of time every day, for example, approximately 15 minutes, in which we will strive to bear with patience all that we see and hear, even when things may be upsetting to us, and even if they are hurtful to us, without losing our composure at all. In cases where it is necessary or obligatory to react, we will do so with measured, calm words, without becoming overly emotional.
Thank you. So based on the 2 previous sources, he's suggesting a very easy way. Take 15 minutes a day in an effort to train ourselves to go from being angry in the situation to exercising patience. And it seems a little bit trivial to take 15 minutes a day to think about this, but if you actually think about it for a second, if you start to do it regularly, like any habit, whether it's exercise, whether it's weight loss, whether it's anything, the more regular you do it, the more easy it's going to come to you, the more natural it's going to come to you. And that's all it takes is 15 minutes.
But you have to do it at a time when you're being challenged. I'm home by myself and I decide the next 15 minutes are pragmatic. Nobody's bothering me, I haven't done anything.
Sure.
Make him bother you.
If I open my credit card bill and my son charged 9 more things, like, that would be a good 15 minutes.
That would be a good 15, perfect.
So, but it's a catch-22, because if you do it only when you're angry, then it might just be reactive and not be everlasting. It's going to just something reoccur every day. If you train yourself, and I don't know how practical it is for each of us, but to do it at the same time every day, 15 minutes of focusing, then when that anger might hit, right, open the envelope, see the credit card charges, and might be able to, okay, you know what, maybe there's a reason these charges are here, and to take a step and a breather into it and to focus it differently.
But you even think also about like the support group mentality, whether it's for Overeaters Anonymous or AA or any of those support networks. People don't go when they're in the heat of the moment. They go for the general support, and that general support and almost that routine of general support is what gives a person, I guess, the ability to get through those moments where it is challenging. So taking the 15 minutes could just be just part of the routine and part of like training yourself to get into that zone, as opposed to dealing with it like how you react in the heat of a moment. So it could also just be like a training mechanism.
Could be. I never thought about it like that. So you never go to an AA meeting when you're drunk.
That's not
When you-
true.
Or you could.
You could.
And you do call a friend when you're in trouble, whether
For
you're
sure.
medically part
For
of
sure,
like
but
that
the
moment
meetings-
to help you calm down.
No, but what
Exactly.
you're saying is absolutely accurate, and yeah, people go there.
You go, right, you go like not in the heat, like
It's
not necessarily.
sustainability.
It's sustainability, exactly. It's this routine of like getting yourself, because even in the moments where you're struggling and you're falling or you feel yourself falling back into a habit, you still have that day-to-day, you know that 12 o'clock, whatever it is, that you're,
It's hard to do alone.
for sure,
It's a good concept.
for sure, no, right. Like everything, right,
Like
it's great in theory, and putting it into practice it's a lifelong.
Quest.
So developing these positive habits, like any habit we're trying to teach ourselves, requires extreme discipline. And I always think about the Karate Kid. Have you seen the Karate Kid? So the amount of hours and effort
Yeah, right.
you put into
Wax.
everyone remembers that scene from Karate Kid, right? Or Rocky. Yeah. Just the amount of
Good.
training and effort that you have to put into any discipline, learning a language, losing weight, passing the Series 7, whatever it is, it requires a crazy discipline. And as a source of encouragement, you should know that these rabbis and even much more contemporary rabbis, they weren't all born with the virtue of patience overtaking them. They also struggled with anger. And
Yeah,
if you look at
because it's human, like you said. I mean, I used to go to this therapist once years ago, and I would be talking, she would say, well, how do you feel right now? I don't know, because then I really didn't know. She said there are only 5 feelings. Mad, you're either mad, sad, glad, lonely, or scared. Pick one. So mad is right in there. I mean,
Right.
it's just part of our fiber. Now I know, then I had no idea.
So I think patience, discipline, as you mentioned, but I also think it takes a level of modesty, perhaps.
Humility.
When you take a step back and you kind of think, you have to be a little bit modest with yourself and say, maybe I was wrong. The anger that I have, is because I think that I'm right about the situation, but maybe I'm wrong. I need to be modest about the situation.
very true.
In a sense.
Right. The Talmud actually talks about how every person is created in the image of God, and every person embodies godliness in them, so that it's part of the basis for respect for human beings, that you would respect another human being, because if they're created in the image of God, it's a form of God service, like to treat another person with respect, and that same applies to getting angry, because it almost like it makes you pause for a second and say, wait a second, like, if I'm standing in front of King of all kings, what would my reaction, be? So for sure, and humility is definitely part of that, because it makes you realize who your audience is, and for sure.
So we can assume that not everybody was born a naturally calm person. That's just how.
The Irish temper we talked about.
Right. So
That's a safe assumption.
yeah. So look at the next story, taken from the Chafetz Chaim. He was born in 1838, died in 1933. He was a contemporary rabbi born in Radin in Poland, and he is best known for a book of Jewish law called the Mishnah Berurah, which is studied pretty much every day in yeshivot and seminaries around the world, and it's one of the sections of the Shulchan Aruch. It's based on Orach Chaim, on how we should live our lives every single day. Translated into English. He's also well known for his book on the correct speech called Shmir HaLashon, and he died in 1933. So it's not someone 18th century, 17th century. He's very contemporary, and this is a story taken straight from him. A disciple once hid under a bench in shul, hoping to observe the Chavetz Chaim's conduct at night. When midnight approached, the elderly tzaddik appeared, the elderly rabbi appeared, opened the ark at the front of the shul, and prayed that God might help him overcome the feelings of anger. See, it didn't come naturally to him. So the person wanted to observe what's happening to him at night, and that was one of his ways. In the evening, he had to beseech God for it, the ability not to be angry. It wasn't something that came easily to him. And even another example, Rabbi Moshe Feinstein, who was probably the most well-known rabbi of the 21st century, passed away in 1986 here in New York. He lived on the Lower East Side, and his seminary was there. One of the greatest Jewish minds. Was very much known for his pleasant demeanor, and people came to him from all around the world, rabbis and individuals with questions and concerns, and not your average questions, but real huge philosophical issues, many to do with integration of technology and modern society into Jewish law, and he had to accept people all day, every day, and he was known just for being so pleasant all the time, at any hour. Even the most provocative of situations, he would always greet someone with a smile. And if you look at the next source, another quote, when the yeshiva student asked Rabbi Moshe Feinstein regarding his serenity, he made it clear that it wasn't natural to him and didn't come quickly. He said it took years for him to work on that trait. It's not something that's going to come easy. Any discipline, working out, training, we're going to have to put effort into this in order to overcome it, in order to overpower it. There are so many other practical tips for creating a new habit for ourselves. You can set aside some money every time you get angry. You know, that's certainly what do you anyone else have a swearing jar at home? No?
We had one when I was
that
in
big.
high school. My grandparents had one.
Curse?
It was
I don't do it anymore, but
You don't?
yeah, I had to put $1 in the jar.
Right.
And then when I graduated high school, they gave them.
Paid for your college.
Yeah.
Start swearing all over.
Another aspect,
That's a good one.
there are many ways to do it, and you really have to know what's gonna work for you. But another idea to deal with our anger is to really put things in perspective, which goes to the point you made earlier, which is, you know what, maybe we said earlier that sometimes the suggestion is the husband and wife should not go to bed with an argument and should talk about it and talk about it and talk about it. But now maybe more a different angle would be, you know what, we're just too involved in it. Let's go to bed and talk about it the next day when we're not as emotionally charged. We don't know such things.
No,
But,
I've never heard of this before.
but it's called putting things in perspective. Let's turn the page. When we place something in perspective, we see that our anger was really causing so much harm. And anger was damaging, and whether the loss we suffered wasn't so great, or whatever the situation was, it really wasn't as big as we made it become, because we let our anger sort of, it's like a mirror in front of us, and it clouds everything that we see, and all we can see is that anger point.
And also all you can see is your own point.
Yeah.
Right. So
Right.
mirror is a very good analogy. It's,
Oh yeah,
Right.
there's nothing but the way I'm seeing it. I'm always
right, for sure. Like especially in the heat of the moment. You're not like, okay, obviously you have legitimacy to your side. Like it's not the first words.
If one lost a beautiful flower, it would be madness for him to react by breaking a precious object worth 1,000 times more than the small flower. For me, the person who loses his temper shatters his peace of mind, a commodity far more precious than the relatively trivial loss which triggered his or her
Yeah,
anger.
right.
Yeah. Very nice way to put it.
So you mentioned earlier, Sandra, humility and modesty. What was the reason you mentioned it? Remember?
Sorry, I'm a little jet lagged today.
I was saying, like, thinking of somebody else's point.
Right, thinking of another perspective, you know, and not I guess, yeah, exactly what you said before. You're in the heat of the moment. You think everything is, the way that you think it
You
should
say it.
be.
So the Torah masters who part of this movement called Balei Musar, which is character development, and they're really on the other side of the Hasidic world. They really talk about ways we can refine our personalities and our characters, and they focused exactly on this point, on the point of humility. I said that every angry person suffers from a lack of being humble, suffers from a lack of humility, and by working on our own humility, will diminish our own arrogance in a situation, and we can elaborate that by looking at the first source, and on developing humility. Source 1, taken from the Shlach HaKodesh, a medieval source. Anybody want to read number 1? Okay, I'll read. Words of the wise, spoken gently, are accepted. Taken from the book of Kohelet. Somebody who has acquired this trait will never come to anger. The meaning of spoken gently is they are not spoken with arrogance. For a person who clings to the attribute of humility will never come to anger, for he is patient and ignores those who deride him.
Yeah, humility is a cornerstone of a lot of these things, and it's interesting because humility also, it does come naturally to some people. I think humility, perhaps for the wrong reasons or the wrong manifestation. Like even we see with Moses, with Moshe Rabbeinu, that he was a very humble person, but we also see his humility evolve because he starts out. His humility was manifested. I'm not good at it. Pick someone else. I'm no good. Pick my brother. Pick somebody else. I'm no good. I have a speech impediment. Like he was like, I'm no good. And then we see his humility evolve to, I am good. I am chosen, but I still embody humility. But there's no question that humility is almost like the antecedent for anger, for sure, because you realize your place and you realize the other person is valuable regardless of whatever's causing the rift.
It's interesting because when somebody is humble, it gives them such a strength. You're taking like a position of being humble and modest, but it's actually empowering you, and I don't know, it gives such a presence when people can do kind of what you were saying earlier. They don't even show they're angry. I was thinking about, there are some people that truly don't get angry in a situation, and they actually make their point so much more effective. And
So true.
Although you have to be careful, as I mentioned earlier, not to let it all be pent up inside you,
Right.
and to leave the setting and to lash out at something else,
Right.
or an object, and then you're just not expressing it to the person in front of you that is in the situation, but you're dealing with it in another vehicle afterwards.
That's actually processed. It's not like a
Right. Because otherwise you're gonna blow at some point to someone or something.
Yeah, being passive is just as destructive.
right.
Right.
Right. Although the person will tell you that I'm not angry, it's not bothering me, and they're letting it
Right.
soak in, which is not good at all.
And we actually talked about this last week, that there's a difference between, like, you're allowed to get upset. Like, you're allowed to have those feelings of being upset, or even feelings of being, you can feel angry. It's the manifestation of that becomes the issue. But, like, feeling upset, feeling sad, those are all, like, human emotions. We're supposed to feel that. That's part of how we process information, process challenge. So, it's just a matter of how it's, kind of how it's delivered.
One last idea in terms of anger management is really developing a higher level of trust and faith in God. And there's the idea in Judaism that God guides us through every experience that happens to us and everything that happens to us in life, and whether we see it this way or not. It's called hashgacha pratit, it's called divine providence. That every situation that happens to us, the good, the bad, the ugly, is meant to help us refine who we are and ultimately have greater faith in God. And that really is subject of a whole class or 10 unto itself. It's a very deep idea, but this next source is really gonna focus on that idea of really developing a greater level of trust in God. And when that knowledge is integrated into the scenario and the situation, in our emotions, we will no longer see the anger in the situation at all. The rabbi who wrote this piece in Hebrew, Rabbi Daniel Kraus Feb, is the chief rabbi of the old city in Jerusalem. Actually, his son recently became the chief rabbi, but he's a brilliant Torah brain, Torah mind. He's probably in his late 70s. He doesn't speak a lot of English, but every year we take a group to Israel, and we go to him Friday afternoon, and he always invites us into his home, and he has a beautiful long dining room table in the old city of Jerusalem, and he's been there for many years, and he always manages to tell a joke in English. And he takes questions. Rachel has a relationship with him as well.
I actually spent Passover with him. I was at his house for Seder like 10 years ago. It's just phenomenal. A truly remarkable individual. So. And
you'd think, so just on that point, you shared with me, you'd think at a great Torah sage's Pesach Seder, what's the whole point of the Passover Seder? It's a little bit of a tangent, but it's going to be relevant in a couple of weeks. What's the point of the Seder?
Telling.
To retell the story of the Exodus from Egypt. And you can go into a Jewish bookstore, probably about now when they're getting over to switch the books from Purim, into the next holiday, into Pesach, and there are so many different versions of the Haggadah available, and so many different commentaries, and so many different angles and discussions, and you would think that at the greatest Torah sage, or one of the greatest minds of this world, there would be deep discussion about the story, and quoting different rabbis, and up until the wee hours of the night, and Rachel shares a completely different story.
He has a bunch of grandchildren. I think he's old. I think he's in his 80s, because I think he has a couple of great-grandchildren.
10 years here and there.
Whatever. And he has all his grandchildren or great-grandchildren sitting around him. He pulls up like chairs. Everybody sits around him, and he has a bag of marshmallows and a couple of bars of chocolate, and he starts asking questions, and the kids start answering, and he doesn't say a word. He's written books about the Exodus. He's a phenomenal scholar, and his grandchildren tell the whole story. That's the whole experience of the Seder. It's unbelievable. He literally, and I was so excited to be there. I'm like, oh, we're gonna get some great insights from the rabbi. And it was all his grandchildren or great grandchildren. I got marshmallows. Yes, I did get marshmallows. And that's it. He was throwing out questions, and his grandchildren were leading the Seder. It was unbelievable. Or great grandchildren. I don't remember much. Young kids though.
Let's have a look at what he says. Not specifically about anger, but about this idea of developing a trust and a deep connection to God. Anyone to read? It's the longest of the sources. Thank you.
Joseph teaches us a great principle of how we can fulfill the difficult instruction of do not bear a grudge, Vayikra Leviticus. We might be able to restrain ourselves from taking revenge, but how is it possible not to even bear a grudge against somebody who does us evil? Yes, if we understand that the person did not do anything, there is no longer room to bear a grudge. If you would not have sold me to Egypt, Joseph says, God would have sent somebody else to do it. An additional reason for not bearing a grudge is to realize that only God makes things happen. God thought it for the good. Joseph calms his brothers, Bereshit. Moreover, everything that God does is for the good. That's my daughter texting. If so, there is no room left to bear a grudge. Joseph even felt gratitude towards his brothers, for in their merit he became ruler over Egypt. Furthermore, concerning his sale, it was apparent that this led to sustaining a great nation. However, the truth is that the same is true of every person and every case. If somebody harms you, heaven forbid, know first of all that it is from God, and second of all that ultimately good will come of it. Even in the case of Joseph, it took a full 22 years until it became clear that God meant it for the good. The Garden of Amunah.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Same idea.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's all. The same.
Right. That it's a crazy episode and story that happened, but the outcome was, I think, we're all the beneficiaries of. Sometimes it takes that deep understanding and faith and knowledge to know that every situation is happening for a greater good. And sometimes that perspective is what we lack in so many instances in things that happen to us. And of course it's always easy, standing outside the pit, no pun intended, and standing after the case. But that's the level that we should all emulate and try and be at. At least he agrees.
But I'm not seeing any concrete suggestions as to how one can achieve this even temperament with which so few are blessed. And, you know, nobody's arguing, you know, that there are any real positive attributes to anger, etc. But other than saying, you know, devote 15 minutes a day to figuring out how to make this happen, you know, anybody have any real practical suggestions? You know, people say count to 10, take a deep breath, but what do you do at that moment where you just feel, how do you inject that stop and think mechanism in a moment of, you know, where you go from 0 to 100 in 3 seconds? How do you make it happen?
You know, I don't think it's a simple answer. I think it's hearing now, giving yourself permission to know that it's a concept. You know, it's first about awareness, right? So we're talking about it here in that sense that it might not happen, like the next time you blow up, I'm not saying you do, I blow up. Maybe afterwards I'll think about, hey, these are some tools here. Not that I'm not a 15-minute-a-day person to do anything, but you might say, oh, you know, is it halakhically, Jewishly? Wow, those guys could do it, you know, so maybe I could do it. That there's something bigger than me.
And also to know
Well, it's on your
it's a
radar,
lifetime of
here,
work.
That's
but
what I mean.
it's,
Well,
you know, in terms of a practical, I don't know what the psychologists, you know, recommend, behavioral, you know, people, but I'd be curious to know, like, how do you make this calm, genteel person, how do you become?
Well, you do it, but it's
Then.
not a calm process.
oh, a lot
It's a
of
messy
It's a long
process,
process also.
And it's
messy.
interesting, and it's messy, but it's interesting because if we, I'm very talkative tonight, if we stop and look at our day, we do it a lot without knowing that we're doing it. Because it's much easier to blow up at somebody on the phone when you're on hold with AT&T or Verizon, or when you get into a cab, and all of those circumstances, it's like those are the ones that like get us. But when it comes to like work and you're dealing with an employee or disgruntled or a boss and having a tough conversation, somehow we pull, like, I'm not saying we don't lose it in those circumstances, or with a kid, or like, there are times throughout our day where we do it. I don't know if we're conscious of when we do it. And it's just those moments that get under our skin that we kind of like end up exploding. But I think we, to a certain extent, you'll find that like if you pause during the day, you'll be like, oh, that was it. I just maybe it was a small example of it, but like I did it. I could have blown up at my secretary for not giving me that really important message, but I didn't. And that's an expression of this anger thing. So I think we find that we do it, but we don't do it always in the heat of the moment that we think that we're more conscious of. So it's a matter of like, I mean, it's training. It's like that consistent training. I mean, again, I think like dieting and working out is like such a good parallel, right? Because I'm not disciplined enough to do it every day. I want to. In my head, I work out every day, but I don't. But like it's like you say, if it's important to you, you're just gonna work at it, even if it's 15 minutes a day of like, you know, walking up my stairs instead of taking the elevator, or like small things that you do to like control as much as you can in those heated moments.
No, the 24-hour rule about text or emails, and the rule, I've heard that one, and that was an eye-opener, and I thought it was a very good suggestion. There have been occasions where I read an email and my reaction was strong. I was so inclined to draft an immediate reply, and then I thought about it, and even though I thought I was correct and substantively what I was going to say, I decided, nope, I'm going to sit and let it go. So there are different things that one hear about speaking softly or gently, whatever the adverb was. Another thing, if you speak a certain way consistently, and then just being mindful of the kinds of things that we're discussing here.
well, I mean, I don't know if this is a Jewish concept or not, but I know that I'm agitated. I lose it very easily. And before I leave the house in the morning and all day long, I ask God to help calm me, keep my nerves in control, so I don't lash out. And when I am praying about that on a regular basis, I don't lash out as much and yell at people or stand too close within the line because they're not really, you know, it does, I don't know if that's a Jewish concept, but I pray all the time. I'm just like, please God, just help me to because I
It's
know
certainly
that I'm
Jewish
an
to
angry
ask for things in
person.
prayer.
I don't know how to do it the right way.
No,
I can
well,
do it
that
in Hebrew,
is
but
the
I
right
just do it in
way.
my own words. Like, please, help. I do it all the time. I pray 100
God
times a day
speaks
over
English
stuff.
too. No,
That's
you're
what I
good.
I just,
Right.
because if it weren't for, I can't do it by myself.
Right.
I can't, just, that helps me
That's good though.
a lot.
That's great.
I have to pray by, just lose it all the time. So,
I don't remember if you said this last week or not. I mentioned last week that I understood that anger is considered one of the what is like arrogance. But is it actually a sin to get angry? I don't know if you mentioned that.
I don't believe it is a sin.
I don't mean a sin to get angry across the board, obviously, but
I guess how you react if you hurt somebody else would be.
Right, I don't think there's a